The night was cold and the streets were empty. A single man walked slowly, his hands inside his worn jacket, his steps echoing against the walls of the old buildings. He had just finished his long shift at work, and all he wanted was to reach his small apartment. The city was quiet, the lamps flickered, and even the air seemed heavy with silence. As he passed a narrow alley, he heard soft whining. He stopped and turned his head, and saw a group of stray dogs gathered near a pile of trash. They were thin, their ribs showing, their eyes dull and hungry. The man felt a deep sadness. He knew this city was full of forgotten lives, not just humans but also animals left behind. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small container of leftovers from his dinner. It was not much, just bread and pieces of meat. But to the hungry dogs it would mean the world. He placed the food gently on the ground. The dogs sniffed the air, their tails wagged, and then they rushed forward to eat. The man smiled faintly, his heart warmed by the sight. Helping them gave him a strange peace, as if his lonely life had at least one small purpose. But as he turned to walk away, something strange caught his eye. A faint movement in the shadows behind the dumpster. At first he thought it was another dog, maybe smaller and too weak to fight for the food. He leaned closer, his curiosity stronger than his fear. What he saw made him freeze. Two small figures crouched together, shivering, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. They were not dogs, not humans either. Their skin was pale with a faint shimmer, their hair tangled and long, their bodies so thin it seemed the bones might break. The man's breath caught in his throat. He blinked, wondering if he was imagining it. But no. The figures were real, and they were staring right back at him. For a moment, silence filled the alley. The man felt his heart race, fear mixing with disbelief. Were these children in costumes? Some strange trick of light? But the longer he looked, the more he realized the truth. They were not from this world. One of the small figures tilted her head and whispered something in a soft, trembling voice. The words were strange. Not human language, but the sound carried pain and hunger. The other one clutched at her sister's arm, eyes wide with terror, as if expecting harm. The man stepped back slowly, his mind racing. He wanted to run, but something deep inside stopped him. There was no threat in their eyes, only fear and desperation. The dogs growled softly, sensing the strangeness, but they returned to their food. The man looked again at the two small girls, for now he could call them that, though they were not like any girls he had ever seen. Their thin hands clutched at each other, their lips dry, their bodies shaking in the cold. The man swallowed hard, his thoughts spinning. How could they be here? Why were they alone? Questions filled his mind, but the sight before him pulled harder than logic. He crouched slowly, lowering himself so he would not appear dangerous. His voice was gentle, almost a whisper. "Are you hungry?" He asked, though he knew they would not understand still. Something in his tone made them look at him differently. The younger one leaned forward slightly, sniffing the air like a wild creature, her glowing eyes fixed on the container of food still in his hand. The man hesitated, then placed another piece of bread on the ground, sliding it toward them. The older one pulled the younger back, afraid, but her hunger was stronger. With trembling fingers, the smaller girl reached out, grabbed the bread, and stuffed it into her mouth with desperate speed. Tears filled her eyes as she chewed, as if even eating was painful. The older one watched carefully, her own stomach growling, then slowly took a piece too. The man's chest tightened as he watched them. This was no trick, no dream. Two alien children, weak, starving, lost in a human city, were sitting right in front of him. The world around him seemed to vanish. The cold street, the flickering lamps, the stray dogs, everything faded. Only the girls remained and their silent plea for help. He knew his life would never be the same. And as he looked over his shoulder, he had the strange feeling that someone else might be watching. The shadows seemed deeper, the night more dangerous. But his eyes stayed on the girls, two strangers from the stars, now bound to his fate by a single act of kindness. The man took a deep breath, torn between fear and compassion. Should he walk away and pretend he had never seen them? Or should he take the risk of helping them, knowing it could change his life forever? The girls stared back, their fragile hands clutching the bread, their glowing eyes filled with both hope and dread. The night grew colder, and the city remained silent. But inside that lonely street, a story had just begun. A story that would test what it truly meant to be human. The man stood frozen for a long moment, his breath visible in the cold night air. The two alien girls huddled together, their bodies shaking, Their glowing eyes locked on him. He could see fear, but also something else. A small spark of trust. The kind that came only from desperation. His heart felt heavy. Torn between caution and compassion slowly, he crouched again and slid the rest of the food container across the ground. The younger girl reached first, her tiny hands trembling as she grabbed the scraps. The older one followed, moving slower, always watching him with suspicion. Her thin arms wrapped protectively around her sister. They ate quickly, stuffing food into their mouths as if afraid it would be taken away. The man realized they had not eaten for days, maybe longer. Their hunger was so great that even old bread and cold meat felt like a feast. As they ate, the man sat back on the ground. His back against the wall, he tried to look calm, not wanting to scare them. The stray dogs finished their share and wandered off, leaving the alley quiet again. Now only the man and the two strange children remained. A part of him wanted to walk away, to forget what he had seen, but something inside whispered that walking away would haunt him forever. He whispered softly, "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The girls stopped eating for a second, their ears twitching at his voice. They exchanged a quick glance, then continued, still cautious. The man noticed details now. Their skin was pale with a faint shimmer. Almost like moonlight, their clothes were torn. Thin rags that barely covered their small bodies. Scars lined their arms and legs, some fresh, some old, signs of hardship and pain. His chest tightened, whoever they were. Whatever their origin, they were just children in need. The younger one finished eating first. She looked up at him with wide eyes. Crumbs on her lips. For the first time, she made a sound that was not fear, a soft hum, almost like thanks. The older one quickly pulled her back, shaking her head. But even she could not hide the way she glanced at him now, less with terror and more with curiosity. The man wondered what to do next. He could not leave them here, weak and starving. But taking them home would be dangerous if anyone found out. He might be accused of something he could not even explain. Yet the thought of leaving them alone made his stomach turn. He sighed deeply and whispered, "Come with me," as he pointed toward the street. The girls stared, unsure, their bodies stiff. The older one shook her head, pulling her sister back into the shadows. The man bit his lip, realizing words would not be enough. He stood up slowly and took a few steps forward, then stopped, turning his back to them. He did not want to look threatening. Instead, he walked a few paces ahead and waited. At first, nothing happened. The alley remained silent except for the soft breathing of the girls. But then he heard light footsteps behind him. Cautious and soft, he turned his head slightly. And there they were, following at a distance, still holding on to each other. His heart swelled. They had chosen to trust him, at least a little. The walk through the empty streets was slow. The man kept glancing over his shoulder, making sure they were still there. Every time he did, the younger one would try to hide behind her sister, but her glowing eyes betrayed her curiosity. The older one stayed alert, scanning every corner, as if expecting danger at any moment. When they reached his small apartment building, the man hesitated. He had never brought anyone here, not even friends. His life was simple, lonely, quiet, and now he was about to change everything. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. Leaving it open behind him, the girls lingered at the doorway, their bare feet hovering on the edge of the step. For a moment he feared they would run away. But the younger one tugged at her sister's arm. Pointing inside, together they stepped in, their glowing eyes wide with wonder. The apartment was small. Just one room with a kitchen corner, a bed and a worn couch. But to the girls it was something more. They touched the wall carefully, amazed by the smooth paint. They jumped at the light when he flicked the switch, covering their eyes from the sudden glow. The man smiled softly. It was like watching children discover magic. He gave them water and they drank greedily, the clear liquid running down their chins. He handed them blankets and they wrapped themselves tightly, their shivers slowly fading for the first time. They seemed a little safer, a little calmer. The man sat on the couch, watching them with quiet amazement. Who were they? How did they get here? He had no answers, only questions, but deep down, he felt he had done the right thing. The younger girl curled up on the blanket, her eyes fluttering shut, exhausted. The older one remained awake, her gaze never leaving the man. Her eyes glowed in the dim light, filled with suspicion but also something else. Perhaps the beginning of trust, perhaps the hope that he might protect them. The man leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, But he knew one thing for sure. His life had just taken a turn he could never undo. And in that small apartment on that cold night, the bond between a lonely human and two alien children had quietly begun. The night stretched long, but inside the small apartment, the silence was different. It was not the silence of loneliness that the man had lived with for years, but the silence of two frightened guests trying to understand a new world. The younger alien girl had fallen asleep quickly, curled up in the blanket like a small child who had finally found warmth. The older one, however, stayed awake, her glowing eyes fixed on the man as if trying to read his every move. The man sat on the couch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his thoughts heavy. He could not believe what was happening a few hours ago. He was feeding stray dogs in a forgotten alley, and now two beings from another world were lying in his apartment. He rubbed his face with both hands, whispering softly, "What have I done?" But even as he said it, he knew he could not turn back. When dawn arrived, pale light slipped through the window. The younger girl stirred, blinking slowly, her face soft and innocent despite the dirt and scars. She whispered something in her strange tongue, a sound almost like music, though broken and weak. The older one helped her sit up, then looked at the man, her expression tense. The man raised his hands gently, showing he meant no harm, then pointed toward the kitchen corner. He opened the small fridge and pulled out milk and bread. It was all he had, but to them it was more than enough. He placed the food on the table and stepped back, giving them space. At first they hesitated, whispering between themselves in their unknown language, but hunger overcame fear and soon they approached. Sitting cautiously on the floor, they tore the bread apart with their thin fingers, eating slowly as if still unsure if this gift was real. The man watched quietly, his chest tightening at the sight. They were so fragile, so young, yet carrying the weight of something far heavier than any child should. He noticed the way the older one always kept an arm near her sister, always guarding, never fully relaxed. She reminded him of someone forced to grow up too fast. It made him wonder what horrors they had seen after the meal. The younger girl wandered around the apartment with cautious steps. She touched the lamp on the table, gasping when the light turned on. She pressed her small hands against the window glass, amazed at the view of the street below. Every ordinary thing seemed like a miracle to her. The man felt something stir in his chest, a mix of sadness and wonder. To him these were normal objects, but to her they were magic. The older one followed more slowly, her sharp gaze studying everything. She did not smile, but her eyes lingered on the warm blanket, the clean water, the roof above her head. Perhaps she was starting to believe this place was safe. If only for a short time. The man wanted to talk to them, to understand who they were, but words failed. Their language was strange, and his was meaningless to them. Still, he tried, pointing at himself and saying, "Human." Then pointing at them with a questioning look, the younger girl tilted her head, then tapped her chest, speaking a word soft and alien. He repeated it clumsily, making her giggle faintly. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, and it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. The older girl, however, stayed serious, repeating her name slowly as if testing him. He tried again, struggling with the sounds, but she nodded once, a sign that he had at least tried. It was a small step, but it was a step toward trust. Later, he noticed their scars more clearly. Some were deep, healed badly, as if they had been hurt and left without care. Others looked like burns, dark marks on pale skin. His stomach twisted. These were not accidents. Someone had done this to them. He clenched his fists, anger rising. Whoever they were, wherever they had come from, they had suffered, and now they were here, in his care that night as the girls rested again. The man sat by the window, staring out at the empty street. Questions burned in his mind. Were there more like them out there? Would someone come searching for them? And if so, would that someone be friend or enemy? He did not know, but he felt the weight of a choice pressing down on him. To hide them was to risk everything, yet to abandon them was something his heart could never allow. The older girl finally moved closer. Standing beside him at the window, she pointed at the stars, her finger trembling, and spoke softly. The words were strange, but he understood the meaning. Home. Her eyes shone with tears as she whispered again, as if calling to a sky that no longer answered. The man swallowed hard, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. He did not know how, but in that moment he silently promised he would keep them safe. The younger girl stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly. The older one turned away from the window, tucking the blanket tighter around her sister. Then she glanced at the man again, her gaze softer now, not full of trust yet, but no longer only fear. It was a silent agreement, an unspoken bond. The man leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pulling at him. He knew his quiet life was over. The world outside his door was dangerous enough, and now with these two alien children under his roof, it could become far worse. But deep inside, he felt something stronger than fear. For the first time in years, he was not truly alone, and no matter the risk, he could not let them go. The days passed slowly, but inside the small apartment change was happening. The two alien girls were no longer silent shadows in the corner. They were beginning to reveal pieces of themselves, small fragments of their hidden story. The man could see it in their eyes, in their movements, and in the way their voices trembled when they tried to speak. The younger girl was the first to break the wall of silence. One evening, while she sat on the couch wrapped in the old blanket, she pointed at the sky outside the window. Her finger traced a small arc, as if drawing something only she could see. She whispered a word, soft, broken, but filled with longing. The man leaned closer, repeating the sound clumsily, trying to understand. Her glowing eyes brightened for a moment, then dimmed again, as if sadness had swallowed her light. The older sister sat beside her, silent at first, but then she too spoke. Her voice was lower, heavier, carrying weight like stones. She spoke in their strange tongue, her words fast and sharp, her hands moving as if to shape the story in the air. The man could not understand, but he listened, every detail burning into his mind. At last, she stopped and pressed her hand against her chest. Her glowing eyes locked on his. In that one gesture he understood. She was not just telling a story. She was telling her truth through broken words, drawings on scraps of paper and gestures. The man began to piece together the fragments. The girls had once lived on a ship, a place full of light and warmth. They had parents, a family, a world above the stars. But something had happened, something terrible. Their ship had been attacked, torn apart by forces they could not fight in the chaos. Their parents had tried to protect them, but the girls were separated when the wreckage fell from the sky. Only the two of them survived. Since then they had been hunted, chased by strange beings who sought survivors for reasons unknown. The man's stomach twisted as he imagined the fear they must have endured, hiding in alleys, starving, shivering, too young to understand why the universe had turned cruel. No child should live like that. No child should carry such scars. And yet here they were, still alive, still fighting to survive. The younger one, despite her pain, still found wonder in small things. She would play with the light switch, turning it on and off, giggling softly. She would press her face to the window, pointing at birds flying past, her glowing eyes wide with amazement. But even in her laughter there was fragility, as if the smallest touch could break her. The older one carried no such laughter. She was cautious, watchful, always on guard. She rarely smiled, her eyes always scanning the door, the window, the shadows. She had become more than a sister. She had become a protector. The man could see it in the way she positioned herself between danger and her younger sibling. It was the instinct of someone who had already lost too much. One night, as the city slept under a blanket of silence, the man awoke to faint sobs. He looked over and saw the younger girl trembling, caught in the grip of a nightmare. The older one was already by her side, holding her tightly, whispering soft words in their alien tongue. Her face was calm, but her eyes were wet, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The man's heart ached at the sight. He wanted to help, but he knew this was a pain he could not touch, so he sat quietly, watching, promising himself that he would do everything he could to keep them safe from now on. The next morning, as the pale sun rose, the man noticed something strange in the sky. Far above the rooftops, faint lights flickered, moving slowly across the clouds. At first, he thought it was only aircraft, but the way they hovered, the way they shifted was not normal. The older girl saw them too, and her reaction told him everything. Her glowing eyes widened, her face drained of color, and she grabbed her sister's hand tightly, pulling her close. She whispered a single word, sharp, fearful, and repeated it again and again. The man did not understand the word, but he understood the meaning. The hunters were near. He stood at the window, his chest tight, his hands shaking. It was no longer just a story told in whispers, no longer only scars from the past. The danger was real, and it was here. The older girl turned to him, her expression desperate, as if begging him to protect them. For the first time, she did not hide her fear. She shared it with him. The man took a deep breath, his thoughts racing. He had no plan, no weapons, nothing but his determination. But as he looked at the two small figures clinging to each other, he felt something awaken inside him. He had lived alone for so long, drifting through life without purpose now. These two children from another world had given him a reason. He could not let them be taken. Not after all they had survived. That night the apartment felt smaller, the shadows heavier, the silence sharper. Every sound outside made his heart race, every flicker of light made him tense. The girls stayed close, their trust in him stronger now, though fear never left their eyes. And as the man sat by the door, listening to the distant hum of the city, he made a silent vow. Whatever hunted them would have to face him first. He would not abandon them, not now, not ever. The days after the strange lights in the sky were tense. The man felt it in his chest, the uneasiness that never left. Every time he stepped outside for food or water, he looked over his shoulder, expecting someone to follow. Every time he returned home, he found the older alien girl waiting by the window, guarding her younger sister like a soldier. The younger one, though, still carried a spark of innocence. She tried to laugh, tried to find joy in little things like playing with the blanket or staring at the flickering light bulb. But even she grew quiet when the nights came, when shadows thickened and distant sounds made her flinch. The apartment no longer felt like a safe hiding place. It felt like a fragile shell about to crack one evening. As the man cooked a small meal on the stove, he heard footsteps outside in the hallway. Not the usual echo of neighbors passing by, but heavy steps that paused near his door. His hands froze, his breath shallow. The older girl stiffened, her glowing eyes darting toward the entrance. She grabbed her sister and pulled her close, her small frame trembling with fear but standing firm. The man quickly motioned for silence, his heart pounding in his chest. A knock came. Slow, deliberate, not friendly. It echoed through the small apartment like thunder. The man's throat went dry. He whispered to the girls, pointing toward the floor. The older one understood immediately. She guided her sister under the loose wooden boards where he had once hidden old boxes. The girls crawled inside, their glowing eyes staring up at him with fear. He placed a finger to his lips, sealing the silent promise to keep them safe. Then he covered the boards again, his hands trembling. The knock came again, louder this time. The man swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay calm. He opened the door just a little, peeking into the dim hallway. 3 figures stood there tall, wrapped in dark coats that hid their shapes. Their faces were shadowed, but their eyes gleamed faintly. Inhuman and sharp, one of them stepped forward. His voice low and cold. "We are looking for 2 strays," he said. His accent strange, his tone filled with authority. "Have you seen anything unusual around here?" The man shook his head quickly, forcing a tired smile. "No," he said softly. "Nothing here but empty walls and stray dogs outside." The figure tilted his head, studying the man's face as if searching for weakness. Behind him, another one sniffed the air. Like a predator catching a faint trail, the man's heart thundered, sweat sliding down his neck, but he held his ground. He leaned casually against the doorframe, pretending to be annoyed. "This is an old building," he muttered. "No one here but me." The figures exchanged looks, silent but full of meaning. Then the one in front stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "We will search," he said firmly. The man's stomach dropped, but he forced a laugh, shaking his head. "Search," he repeated. "You'll only find dust and broken furniture, trust me." He opened the door wider, stepping aside as if he had nothing to hide. The 3 figures entered slowly, their movements deliberate. They scanned the room, their strange eyes glimmering as they looked at every corner. One moved to the window, another to the small kitchen. The third stood near the bed. The man's palms itched with sweat, but he kept his expression calm. He spoke casually, asking them where they were from, why they cared about strays, but none of them answered. Their silence more threatening than words. One of the figures paused near the loose floorboards. The man's heart nearly stopped. The figure's gaze lingered there, his head tilting slightly. He tapped the wood once with his boot, the sound echoing. The man stepped forward quickly, laughing nervously. "Careful," he said. "The boards are weak, nearly broke my foot last week." He bent down, knocking the boards himself as if to prove his point, then stood up again, blocking the view with his body. The figure's eyes narrowed, suspicion heavy in his gaze, but after a long pause, he stepped back, saying nothing. Minutes stretched like hours, but finally the leader turned to the man. His cold voice broke the silence. "If you see anything, Strange, you will tell us. The man nodded quickly, forcing another fake smile. Of course, he said. I mind my own business. But if I see something, I'll let you know. The figure stared at him one last time, then motioned to the others. Together they left, their heavy footsteps fading down the hallway. The moment the door clicked shut, the man sagged against it, his body trembling. His breath came in shaky gasps. His heart still racing, he hurried to the floor. Pulling the boards away, the two alien girls looked up at him, their glowing eyes wide with fear, their small bodies pressed tightly together. The younger one let out a sob. Clinging to her sister, the older one, though silent, reached out and grabbed the man's sleeve. Her grip tight. For the first time she had touched him willingly. Not out of fear, but out of trust. Her eyes met his, full of gratitude and something deeper. In that moment, the man knew they no longer saw him as just a stranger. He was becoming something more that night. The apartment was heavy with silence, but it was not the same silence as before. The bond between them had grown stronger, forged in fear and trust. The man sat awake, watching over them as they finally drifted into uneasy sleep. He knew the hunters would return. He knew this was only the beginning. But he also knew one thing for certain. He would protect them no matter the cost. The man knew the hunters would return. They had searched his apartment once, and though he managed to deceive them, their eyes had burned with suspicion. It was only a matter of time before they came back. Harder, stronger, more determined. He could not wait for that moment. He had to move the girls somewhere safer, somewhere beyond the reach of those who hunted them. The older alien girl seemed to sense his thoughts. She stayed close to him, her glowing eyes sharp, as if she too knew the danger was growing. The younger one clung to her sister's side. Still fragile, but a little braver now, they trusted him. Even if their voices could not say the words, that trust was enough to push him forward late at night while the city was asleep. He gathered what little he had, a backpack with water, bread, and a few old clothes, a small flashlight, some money, and a worn jacket. He looked around the apartment, his home for years, and realized he might never come back. It did not matter. Home was no longer walls and windows. Home had become the two small figures waiting quietly by the door. He whispered, "We have to go." And though the words were meaningless to them, they understood. The older girl nodded once, her jaw set with determination. The younger one grabbed his hand, her small fingers trembling but holding tight. The three of them stepped into the dark hallway, their footsteps soft, hearts racing. The city outside was silent, but silence could be dangerous. Every corner looked like a trap. Every shadow felt alive. The man led them through back streets. Avoiding the main roads, they passed shuttered shops, broken fences, and empty alleys. The girls followed closely, their glowing eyes scanning the dark. The man could feel their fear, but he also felt their trust pressing into him like a weight he could not fail to carry. Hours passed as they walked, and the city slowly gave way to the outskirts. The man had only one plan: to reach the old train yard, where abandoned cars and broken tracks stretched like a graveyard of iron. Few people went there, and he hoped it would be safe enough to hide, at least for a while. But safety was not easy to find halfway there. A sharp sound echoed behind them, the crunch of boots on gravel. The man spun around, his breath catching. Dark figures appeared at the far end of the street, their eyes glowing faintly in the night. "The hunters run," the man whispered, though his voice shook. The girls did not understand the word, but they understood his urgency. He grabbed their hands and pulled them, their small feet pounding against the ground as they raced through the empty streets. The hunters shouted something in their harsh language, the sound sharp and cruel. Then came the pounding footsteps. Faster, closer. The man's lungs burned, his legs heavy, but he did not stop. He led the girls through narrow alleys, jumping over trash bins, ducking under broken fences. Every step felt like a heartbeat against time, every shadow like a hand reaching to grab them. The younger girl stumbled, almost falling, but he lifted her into his arms without slowing down. She clung to his neck, her glowing eyes wide with terror. The older one kept pace, fierce determination in every stride, her breaths sharp but steady. They reached the train yard just as the hunter's footsteps grew louder. The man ducked into the maze of old train cars, the rusted giants looming like silent guardians. He slipped into one of the broken cars, pulling the girls inside. They crouched low, their breaths ragged, their hearts pounding as one, through the cracks in the metal. He saw shadows moving. The hunters were here, their voices echoing across the yard, sharp and commanding. The man pressed a finger to his lips, urging silence. The younger girl buried her face into his chest. Trembling, the older one held his sleeve tightly. Her glowing eyes locked on him. She was not only afraid, she was watching to see if he would protect them. Minutes crawled by like hours. The hunters moved closer, their boots crunching on the gravel, their voices growing louder. The man's body shook, fear threatening to consume him, but he held the girls tighter. He thought of the night he first saw them, starving in the alley, their glowing eyes filled with despair. He thought of the promise he made. Silent but unbreakable, he would not let them be taken, not while he still breathed. When one of the hunters drew too close, the man acted. He grabbed a loose iron bar lying on the floor of the train car. His grip was unsteady, but his will was strong. As the hunter peered inside, the man swung with all his strength. The metal clanged. The figure stumbled back with a snarl. The man shouted, "Go!" Though the girls did not need translation, the older one pulled her sister, and together they bolted deeper into the yard. The man followed, heart pounding, lungs burning, adrenaline roaring through his veins. They weaved through rusted cars, climbed over broken tracks, until finally they slipped into another abandoned car far from the hunters. They collapsed inside, gasping for air, their bodies trembling. The girls clung to him, their small arms wrapping around his chest for the first time. The older one pressed her forehead against his shoulder, a gesture of trust deeper than words. The younger one sobbed quietly, whispering her strange language. The sound filled with both fear and gratitude. The man held them close, his own body shaking. He knew this was only a small escape. The hunters would not stop. But for now they were alive together, free for another night, and in that fragile moment, surrounded by rust and shadows, the man realized something powerful. He was no longer just a lonely human who fed stray dogs. He had become their protector, their shield, their family, and he would keep running. Keep fighting, keep risking everything until they were safe. The old train yard was silent, but the silence was heavy. The man sat with his back against the cold wall of the abandoned car, his arms wrapped around the two alien girls, their small bodies pressed close to him, their breaths uneven, their glowing eyes still wet with tears. Outside, the night stretched endless, but for the first time, he felt he was no longer truly alone. The younger girl clung to him tightly, her face hidden against his chest. The older one stayed awake, her gaze sharp, always listening for danger, but even she leaned into him now, her guard softening just a little. The man could feel it. The fragile trust they had given him had become something deeper. Hours passed, and the first light of dawn broke over the broken train yard. The hunters' voices had faded into the distance, but the man knew they would return. They would not stop until the girls were found. He had no plan, no safe place to take them, yet his heart refused to let fear break him. He looked at the two children who had fallen into his life by chance, and he realized the truth. He was willing to fight for them, to protect them, even if it meant risking everything. That morning he searched the yard for supplies. He found an old tarp, some metal scraps, and broken crates. It was not much, but it helped to make a small shelter inside the train car. The girls watched him, their glowing eyes following every movement. When he handed them bread from his pack, the younger one smiled faintly, her first real smile since they met. It was small, fragile, but it filled his chest with warmth. As the day stretched on, the older girl began to draw in the dirt with a piece of charcoal she had found. She sketched shapes broken and unclear, but together they formed a story. A ship in the sky, a flash of light, falling fire, hunters with cruel eyes. The man sat beside her, watching as she drew. He did not need words to understand. This was their past, their pain, their reason for running. When she finished, she pressed the charcoal into his hand, as if passing the story to him. Her glowing eyes met his, sharp but filled with something new. It was no longer only suspicion, no longer only fear, it was trust. And in that moment, he understood. She had accepted him not as a stranger, but as someone who belonged to them. That night, danger returned. The sound of engines rumbled in the distance. Lights swept across the yard. The hunters were back, their voices cutting through the air. The man's chest tightened, but he was ready this time. He guided the girls deeper into the train yard, moving silently through shadows. When one of the hunters drew close, he threw a stone to distract them, leading them away from the children, step by step. He used every ounce of his courage, every drop of his strength. not as a fighter but as a protector. The chase was long, but by luck and determination, they escaped once more when the danger finally faded. The girls clung to him, their tears soaking his jacket. The younger one whispered a broken word into his ear, repeating it softly. At first, he did not understand, but then he realized it was the same word she had once used when pointing at him. A word that meant more than its sound. It meant family. The man's throat tightened, his eyes stinging with tears he had not felt in years. He looked down at the two fragile beings, survivors of another world, and he knew it with certainty. They were no longer strangers, no longer guests in his home or burdens to protect. They were his daughters now, not by blood but by choice, by love, by the bond of survival. The stars shone above the broken train yard. Distant and cold, the older girl gazed at them, her glowing eyes reflecting the light. She reached out and took his hand, her grip firm, her silent way of saying what words could not. The younger one curled against his side, already drifting into sleep, her small hand resting on his chest. The man wrapped his arms around them. Holding them close, the night was still dangerous. The hunters would return again. The future uncertain, but for the first time, he did not feel lost. He had a reason, a purpose, a family. As the city slept and the stars watched silently, a lonely human who once left food for stray dogs had found something far greater. He had found two children from the stars who now called him their own. And in that fragile bond, humanity's greatest strength was revealed. Not power, not weapons, not wealth, but compassion. The kind of compassion that could turn strangers into family and enemies into nothing. The kind of compassion that could change fate itself. In the broken train yard, under the watch of the endless sky, a new family was born. And though the road ahead would be filled with danger, fear, and struggle, they would face it together. For together they were no longer weak. Together they were strong, together they were home.